Hello, everyone. Welcome to the session of how can the practice of linking the past, present, and future lead to systematic changes. I would like to welcome our esteemed speakers, Victoria Mulligan from the Speculative Future New Zealand, Alice Dimond from Maori Future Makers, Dr. Brenda Ogembo from the Parliament of Kenya, and Abby Nokes from the School of International Futures. I would like to invite Abby to the podium, and she will start the conversation.
Brilliant, thank you and welcome. We thought we'd start today with a very small activity, so I'd like to invite all of you to stand up, please. And if you can't stand, raise a hand, but thank you. So, I would like you to stay standing if at the forum this year you know 5 or more people. When I say no, it doesn't need to be deep collaboration, but you know to have a quick chat with. Stay standing if you know 5 or more. Okay. If you know 25 or more people, stay standing. If not, please sit down. And if you think you know 45 or more people, can you stay standing? Brilliant. So we've got a handful of people in the room who know at least 45 people. And in the network space, I know we're not a formal network, we're more of an informal network, but we would see these people as the nodes or having a lot of invisible power. And that's something that we're going to be talking about a lot more about how you spot those people and how you supercharge them in your network. So, Vic, I'm going to hand over to you to frame the network.
I think your mic's Mic not working. Mic is working?
Yeah.
How's that? Okay. Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Victoria Mulligan, tōku ingoa, no Tamaki Makaurau, Aotearoa, New Zealand, aho. Kia ora everyone, my name is Victoria Mulligan. I am a foresight specialist, network specialist, and I work in Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland in New Zealand. And firstly, I just want to say thank you for giving us your time and coming here today. I'm always really encouraged when I see a room start to fill up with people who care about networks or care that we need to be thinking more intentionally and meaningfully about how we gather and how we collaborate. So myself and my panelists, like most people, wear multiple hats. And so today I am wearing the hat of a director and a network coordinator of the Aotearoa New Zealand Futures Network. We're a network that was stood up about 2 years ago now, with the aim to galvanise energy around foresight, capability build, nationally and across sectors. And so that's what we're trying to do, and that's what I'll be talking about a bit today. Now, we're going to run this panel a little bit differently to how some of the panels might look over the course of the forum. We decided not to have a moderator. So we thought 4 strong women with multiple strong opinions, what could go wrong? And so bear with us today as we experiment with trying to do this without a moderator. I wanted to start by giving some sort of foundational definitions around what we do in networks. So to start with, what is a network? We define networks essentially as a web of relationships that connect people and things. And networks have been around for a very long time. They're not a new thing. But what we're seeing more now is a real leaning into intentional design of networks for impact. And you will hear us talk quite a lot about impact networks. So to define that a little bit further, we consider impact networks to be very specific to when you are galvanizing energy around a shared purpose. And impact networks can take multiple different forms. Learning networks, which are essentially what it says on the tin, action networks when you are have actors, individuals, organisations aiming to do something, and movement networks, which are essentially networks of networks designed to affect sort of more systemic change. Now, the other thing that you're going to hear us talk about a lot today is network weaving as a concept. So I might get us to bring up the Mentimeter if we can. And if you can ping the QR code, really interested to hear what network weaving means to you. Got it up there yet? It's coming.
Yeah.
There we go. So it should come up as your answers do, in theory. But for us, network weaving is about building relational capital. So that is around building spaces, opportunities for connection, for collaboration, ways that we can build trust. Change happens at the speed of trust, and that is essentially what is foundational to networks working well and working meaningfully. So that's, I guess, a frame-up of what we're going to talk about today. I've shared with you the hat that I'm bringing to the conversation, and I might pass now to Alice to talk a little bit about what she does and how she is working with the networks.
Awesome. Well, kia ora koutou, he uri tēnei ngō Ngaitahu. So I descend from a tribe called Ngaitahu. We're an Indigenous tribe, a Maori tribe in the South Island of New Zealand. And when I first was asked to be part of this panel, I did have a feeling where I was like, I don't know what I know about networks, but then I thought about it more and I was like, well, actually being part of my iwi or my tribe means I'm part of a network of 80,000 of us. And so I view networks through that lens, and I just want to reference a cultural practice that we have, which is called whakawhanaungatanga. And whakawhanaungatanga is what I did at the start when I said he uri tēnei ngō Ngaitahu. And sorry if you're trying to write down that word now, because it does have about 20 letters, so good luck guessing what they are. But this practice is where I say, I descend from the people of Tahu. And immediately it means that when I sit within a room, I'm hearing where other people descend from, the lands in which they connect to, their ancestors, and therefore the context of who they are and how I connect to them. And it means that immediately we're moving from being a series of individuals to being a we, or we're kind of forming this woven tapestry of connections. And to me, that's where transformative work begins. And I want to reference something that you may have seen in the media at the moment, happening back in Aotearoa, New Zealand, back home, with the Hikoi Motatiriti, or the March for the Treaty Principles Bill. And what I want to say is that I believe that our superpower as Māori are relationships, and relationships are the reason that all those people have turned up overnight at Parliament to oppose the bill that we don't believe in as a people. And that's how we connect. It means that right from the get-go, those people were ready to go. We had allies to the cause. So I believe that's our superpower as Māori, and that's not to generalise or romanticise who we are. But I think in general, I've noticed that Indigenous people really have this close connection to what it means to be in relationship with people, with land, and therefore we're always looking for ways to connect. And I think I'm going to pass it to Brenda now.
All right, thank you. And talking about Parliament, we're the ones who always receive the protests of everybody. Nobody likes us. Hello, everyone. My name is Brenda Ogembo. I work for the Parliament of Kenya, and in that space, I wear many hats. But the hat that I'm representing here today is I head the secretariat that is currently the secretary of the Kenya Senate Futures Caucus. We recently set up a caucus of senators looking into futures and foresight work and trying to integrate that in the work that we're doing in Parliament. And so what I essentially do is try and bring together different networks to help members of Parliament, especially senators, think about different work that they do, but in this space, think about futures and foresight and how they can integrate that both in legislation, in oversight, in representation, and then take that and try and also connect it to the work that I do in citizen engagement and with devolved government. And so I think I will pass it on to Abby to introduce herself.
Thank you. So the hat that I'm going to be wearing today is a global network weaving hat. So what does it mean and look like to weave networks across generations, across sectors, across geographies? And I'm here from the School of International Futures, and we host or hold a number of networks within our kind of broader community, from the Next Generation Foresight Practitioners Network, which is a community of over 900, mostly under 35s, of which Alice is one, who are using futures and foresight in their communities to drive change. And very much using, I think they're doing some of the most incredible kind of fringe practice. They're from over 90 countries. But also we host the Pioneers Network, which is a collective of champions of today's leaders who are championing long-term governance and thinking about the well-being of future generations. So they're from, generalizing here, but from different generations, but also across sectors, across geographies. And why we care about networks, and I'm going to sort of transition us into thinking about the power of networks and the purpose of networks, is that we believe, I think collectively, but also at the School of International Futures, that it's not ideas that change the world, it's people with ideas that change the world, and people connecting to other people to do that. And from our perspective, we think that networks are particularly powerful because they allow you to do 4 things much, much better. The first is research. So from the perspective of if you have a wide network of people, you're able to gather much more perspectives, fringe perspectives, listen to lots of different ideas that can come together and inform a much sort of better perspective and collective, a more complete set of insights. But it also allows you to do practical research as well. So, for example, we've just, at the Summit of the Future a couple of months ago, released an implementation handbook based on 50 countries, leaders from 50 countries, using different practical ways of integrating long-term thinking. It also allows you to surface and amplify innovation. So, for example, you're able to spot what's the new practice, and you're able to distribute that insight about what new practice might be across your network. And again, an example is that we host a sort of collection around intergenerational fairness, and we've developed an intergenerational fairness assessment matrix, which is now being distributed and can be piloted by people, and that's been made open source. So networks allow you to innovate quickly. They also allowed you to redirect resources. So we've got people within our network who would love to be doing futures and foresight work, but don't necessarily have the institutional backing. But we've also got connections for people who do have the resources. So we do a lot of brokering of helping to identify resources and helping to channel them to where they might be used. And an example is an amazing NGFP member called Tolu, who is from Nigeria, and she's developed, a couple of years ago, she developed a way of thinking about the future of urban and health. So it's called Urban Better, and it's what does the future of cities, particularly in Africa, look like if you think about sustainability and you think about changing demographics. And we've been able to identify a pot of $300,000 from one of our contacts that's able to channel to her. And the final thing that I think networks allow you to do really powerfully is to set the agenda, because by bringing together people with different perspectives and voices, you're actually able to challenge power and the way that things challenge the status quo and put together a multi-generational, multi-sectoral, a global perspective on how can we build a hopeful future and what could look differently as a result of that. So, Brenda, maybe I'll pass to you to say a bit about why you think in your context.
Yeah, and so building on what Abby is saying, I think one of the most important things, especially in the work that I do in Parliament, is that networks allow me to extend out possibilities. Many of you who know or who have engaged with Parliament know that parliaments really operate on the back of procedure and rules. And so we're often constricted in the work that we're able to do, who we're able to engage with, how much we can say, especially as staff in Parliament. And oftentimes for members, they have constrained resources. Increasingly, parliaments don't have the kind of resources that they've had for years, but there's still a lot of work, there's a lot of demand from people about what they want from the legislature, how they want the legislature to engage. And so the power of networks, or what I've found from kind of weaving the different networks and partnerships that we have, such as with people like SWAF, is that I'm able to extend out the work that Parliament is able to do. So for example, with my relationships with SWAF, I was able to actually introduce the work of futures and foresight in Parliament, because those capacities don't exist in Parliament. Parliament doesn't have the human capital, if you will, to be able to do everything that people wanted to be able to do. Also to be able to bring in the resources we need to be able to do this work. The work of introducing it or building the capacity, or building the institutional capacity to be able to do this is only possible through network weaving, because there are a lot of people out there who have the knowledge, the resources, the skills, but they don't have the space within which to engage. But I have the capacity to weave them together, to introduce them to the politicians, for example, who are interested in this work, to know who is interested in this work, to be able to bring different partners, for example, civil society actors who don't know each other, but are all interested in engaging Parliament. I'm able to bring them together and actually extend this work. But as we think about these different resources and the possibilities that all these networks pose, it then takes us to the place where we begin to think about trust. How do we make these networks work? How are we able to ensure that all these different people who don't know each other are able to engage and trust one another and almost cede their power to one another, if you will? And it makes me think, how have we been able to do this? What is the role of trust in relational work in building networks? And I would say that, one, it's listening. How do you build trust? It's through listening. A lot of the work that I'm able to do, how do I bring different partners together? It's by hearing what people are saying and being very intentional in how we listen, and also being patient. Networks don't just grow overnight. I've been doing this work. We had started the work of building the Senate Futures Caucus, I think 3 years ago. It was only launched last year. And it was work of patience, patience and listening and being dismissed by bureaucrats and being told this is not relevant to us, but always listening and hearing different people who are interested. And then finally, after about 2.5 years, landing on a senator who was talking about how his community, the Maasai community in Kenya, had been setting aside land for generations, planning for the future, and could not understand why the Kenyan government had found itself in this massive debt crisis without thinking about the future of young Kenyan people, and realizing that what he needed was the language, and realizing that SWAF, who had been trying to partner with us for a very long time, was willing to support this. And so finally last year, we launched the Kenya Senate Futures Caucus. So there's a lot of work that goes there in being very intentional in listening to different partners, and giving space and time for the network to grow both organically, knowing when to push and when not to push. But within that also lies dynamics of power. There's a lot of power that goes into building networks. And power doesn't always look the way that we imagine that it looks. When you look at the network that we've built in the Kenya Parliament, the lead actor in that is Senator Ledama Olakina, who is a boisterous, those of you who know him, is a boisterous, wonderful human being. But the person who builds that network, who has been doing the work for 3 years, is myself. So networks are, and it requires a lot of humility. But I want to pass on to Alice to talk more about power, because I think she has some very interesting thoughts on this.
Thank you. And yes, I feel like you're a very powerful person, so I'm surprised there's someone else out there who you would consider to have more power. So I just wanted to talk about power from, so I think that power can show up in many different ways, and one way that it shows up is in terms of the knowledge that we're valuing in the room, the way that we're interacting, and whose kind of knowledge system or ways of knowing and being does that draw from. And immediately, I believe that as soon as you're valuing a particular way of interacting, that shifts the power dynamics in a room, and it's really important when you're doing work within networks that you're noticing whose knowledge you're valuing. So the thing about networks is that I believe that they allow us to kind of bridge these alternative ways of knowing and being, but often the non-dominant perspectives are the ones that are marginalized in that space. So how do we start to build trust over trying to surface some of those non-dominant perspectives and give them value and power within a network? And I just want to give an example of some of the work we've been doing back home. So I work for an organisation called Tokona Raki, or Maori Future Makers, and we have created a shared practice, or kawa we call it, in our future making or solution making or change making work. And it's called te korikoreka. Again, big Māori word. I think at the very end we're going to put another QR code that will link you to some of our work, so you'll be able to find it there. Look for the purple, that's our colour scheme. But so te korikoreka, what it is it's a way of interacting, and it means as soon as we start our network weaving work, or when we're working with other people, we always are unashamable in the fact that that's our practice of interaction, and it's drawn from our own cultural perspective as our ways of understanding, the ways that come natural to us in terms of how we like to interact. And it means that when we're working with non-Māori, immediately we're rebalancing those power dynamics because we are prioritising our ways of knowing and being. And I think that that's an important thing to just pay attention to is what are the knowledge systems that you're valuing and how can you start to rebalance those power dynamics within networks by possibly looking to those usually marginalised perspectives and ways of thinking. And I think so what we wanted to do now is have another QR code for another Mentimeter that talks about, that asks you to answer a question, which is, what are the challenges to collaboration from your perspective? So things like power. So that will be behind me.
Let's see if this, did anyone get onto the QR code Mentimeter? Sorry, did anyone make it to the Mentimeter through the QR code? Brilliant.
Mine doesn't show.
That is not the QR code that we're looking for.
Hey, there you
Oh,
go.
look, okay, that's cool.
So that was the last question. So that's awesome to see all your answers there.
Collaboration. Connection, power.
Okay, the next one might appear at some point. And I think, Victoria?
Yeah, cool. So I think it's really a really interesting conversation. I find it interesting because I think the concept of networks and network weaving can often be quite conceptual. It can feel really unwieldy and overwhelming, particularly when you're trying to convene big groups of people to do meaningful work. You've heard Brenda talk about the challenges of trying to do this work in Parliament. You've heard Alice, you've heard Abby talking about trying to create global movements. And I think it's really easy for people to go, this is just a lot, this is really tough. And it is, and it takes time, and you're right that building trust does take time. But I also think it's worth highlighting that sometimes I feel like we use that time as a get-out-of-jail-free card. We're actually not going to invest in building networks and fostering networks because we don't have time, because we need to respond quickly now. And I think that's a mistake. I spend a lot of time thinking about how we intentionally can design so that we can build trust faster. Because as I said earlier, change happens at the speed of trust. So that is a non-negotiable. And hearing Abby in particular talk about how power shows up. Sometimes I think we make the mistake of trying to include everybody. And when you include everybody, sometimes nothing happens. So we talk about the concept a lot of generous exclusion or meaningful inclusion. You need the right people in the room so that you can create these not just safe spaces, but brave spaces. So if I take the example of what we've been doing in New Zealand, trying to build this foresight network, we co-created that network with the community and asked them, what is it that is missing here? If we want to do foresight well, if we want to institutionalise this way of working, what do you need? What does it look like? What would enable you to feel safe in this space? What's the purpose of it? What are the principles that will guide the way that we come together and that we work together? And I think the other thing that we need to ask ourselves when we are intentionally designing these ways of coming together is what purpose is it serving not just for the network, but what does it serve on a personal level and what does it serve on a professional level? Because people stay in a network and the network is maintained if it meets more than one of those needs. And I think often with network design, network sustaining, it's really difficult to keep it going unless somebody is owning it and someone is responsible for it and someone is coordinating it. And I know that from my friends up here because it's invisible work, it is under-resourced work. It is often done by women, regularly. Women in the space do this invisibly. And I think that's worth acknowledging anyway. Did you manage to find your way to the second QR code? Could we have the second?
To do the next QR code? Yeah, it's cute.
Yes.
Yeah. So it should take you back to the Mentimeter page. And the second question is the one Alice just talked about, around what are some of the challenges that you're facing or you feel might be obstacles in the creation of good networks? Is there not a second question below the first?
Oh, there we go. Yeah. So I just wanted to pick up on doing this work and how hard it is, and some of the challenges, because building, particularly, I said, coming from the lens of intergenerational networks and at a global scale, it really is hard, and it's possibly getting harder. 100 years ago, we had 3 to 4 generations alive at any one time, and now it's closer to 6 to 7, and obviously not all within the same family, but we've got 6 to 7 generations alive at the same time. And at the same time, we all know that the social contract between generations is fracturing/breaking down. If you think about intergenerational debt or housing crisis or the environment, there are decisions that are being made by certain generations that are going to be, those implications are going to be felt long into the future by future generations. And so how do you actually take that into consideration and hold spaces where people with very different perspectives and different incentives can actually come to collaborate with each other, and doing so in a non-tokenistic way. And I think we're seeing a lot more, for example, young people being brought into spaces where power's been held, and that's brilliant. But too regularly, it's tokenistic, and it ends up, I would say, to some extent, fracturing that relationship even further, because it's not done in a thoughtful way and it's not facilitated meaningfully. And so what does it actually take to do it meaningfully? And I think I'd go back to what Brenda was saying, that it is about listening and asking the question to start. What does it mean, particularly for young people who may not have the institutional resources behind them, may not, have those connections? They are often taking risks being in these spaces. So how can we make sure that these spaces are mutually beneficial to them, and that they are safeguarded in those spaces, and we are midwifing and caring for those voices and those individuals, whilst also still being kind and considerate to the people that hold power today, because people are not going to willingly necessarily give up that power if they aren't held and supported to do so. And that is such an art, and one that we are learning how to do a lot, but I think it does start with listening, and it starts by asking questions. And I think all of this actually is really difficult to do if you can't actually see what that network looks like in the first place. And Vic has done some incredible work, kind of starting to build out that infrastructure and using infrastructure really smartly to think about how you can build these types of networks and spot the power within them.
Yeah, so let's see if we can bring up a map onto the screen. Any chance of that?
The other tab. If you flick to the other tab, that's what you want.
And while we come up with
Look,
that,
it's coming.
while we bring that up, I just wanted to shine a light on some people here at the forum actually who are doing amazing work around meaningful youth engagement. Oh, there we go. But UNICEF and Felipe Bosch, if you come across the folks from the UNICEF Youth Foresight team and Felipe, they're doing absolutely amazing work around meaningful youth engagement as well. Sorry.
No, so I think this is interesting. So this is an activity that we did when we started to build the New Zealand Foresight Network. We really didn't know what was going on in New Zealand in terms of foresight. We have quite a good reputation for futures thinking, particularly in government. But when you ask the question, who is doing what, where, and how, at the time there was just no information. So you could go to a few people and you could say, are they doing foresight in health? And they would say, yes, you should talk to that person. And then they would put me on to somebody else, and so on and so forth. And so what we did is we decided to actually map all of the people that were engaged in foresight activities, or at least acknowledged that they were in the space of foresight. We used the APF definition of using foresight and futures mindsets, tools, and methods, I think. I think the mindsets part of that definition was quite helpful. But essentially what this has enabled us to do is to create a baseline for what foresight looks like through people in Aotearoa at the moment, which is quite a unique and new thing. This has been in existence now for almost 2 years. And what it's allowed us to do is, I'm going to, I think, say this backward, but it's allowed us to have a baseline for what we looked like 2 years ago, but also how that network has developed, what the health of it looks like, where there is opportunity to put interventions in the system. We can identify where there are strengths that we should be amplifying and giving some visibility to so that others can learn. We can recognise where people just aren't connected in and they're off on the fringe, and where they might like to be brought in. It helps us identify where there is room for collaboration. So you can see that all of the circles signify nodes, so people that are working in foresight in New Zealand. And the lines between them signify the strength of the connection. So the thicker the line, the more strongly connected you are to that other actor. So you are at a very thick line, you're doing collaboration, you're actively currently collaborating. A very fine line, a weak line is a weak link, so you might be connected to that person but not working with them. So an example of what we've done in the last year is we saw that actually in Christchurch, where Alice is from, there was a really strong hub of activity in futures and foresight, and that all around the rest of the country there wasn't that much going on. And that's interesting because Auckland, where I'm from, is our largest city. There are a lot of us by New Zealand standards, but we were all disconnected or very, very weakly linked. And so we identified that as an opportunity where we could put an intervention in the system to start bringing together the people that were interested in foresight and who might want to learn more, might want to build capability, but equally might want to give something to the network. And so we've been doing a lot of work with the Auckland community now, and what we've seen is the health of the Auckland area in foresight and futures has grown significantly. However, the interesting thing is what this mapping activity did was it shone a light on the foresight community in New Zealand, and a lot of people would say, wonderful, like this is great, we want to be part of this community, and they have joined as well, which in and of itself is great, but growth in and of itself isn't success, in my opinion. So what's happened is as our network has grown, the connection between the people in the network has decreased, which I think is problematic in itself. What that means is that you need more people in that network to then lean into network weaving. And so now I think the next evolution of looking after this foresight network in New Zealand is going to be, well, how do we then foster some of those network weaving capabilities in current members of the network? And through doing this, we've actually been able to identify who some of those actors are, who will be quite influential in that space, much like the activity that Abby did right at the start, where she said, stand up if you have X amount of connections. We can see through doing an activity like this that there are people whose reach is quite large, and they're likely to be quite effective network weavers. So yeah, it's been quite a game changer for us, just in terms of understanding the landscape, where foresight is strong, where it's not strong, and who is really helping to shape that in New Zealand.
I'm such a geek. I love those kind of maps. They're amazing. And you're doing one with DFF right now for helping to start to map the DFF community as well.
Yeah, we are. So that will be an interesting thing to follow as well. So the Global Future Society, we're mapping the level of connection between the members of the Global Future Society as well to understand how globally as foresight communities we are connected and collaborating. So that will be one to watch.
So that's one kind of infrastructure that can actually practically help you visualize and also grow your network. And I just wanted to share a couple of things before we start to wrap up, which I found incredibly useful for weaving networks. So the first is for anyone who's come across the organisation, actually they've just closed, but an organisation called Converge. They've got an incredible toolkit online and it's still live, and I think we've got a link to it actually, but they talk about the 5 C's of network weaving. So common purpose, cultivating trust, convening people, coordinating action, and collaborating for system change. And I think a lot of networks often make the mistake of jumping to those final 2, which is coordinating action and collaborating for change, without having the sort of the infrastructure and the foundations of the first three. So I was just going to quickly share some insights from common purpose and convening people that might be valuable in different contexts as well. So around common purpose, a big lesson that I've learnt the hard way over time is that having a shared common purpose is brilliant, and you want to obviously hold that space to be able to surface what that is, but without neglecting the fact that people are there because they've got a personal agenda. So how can you surface the personal agenda and weave those personal agendas together to make sure that people who are in a network are there for themselves and for what they want to achieve, as well as what they want to achieve as part of a collective whole. And then the second is around common purpose is keep iterating on it. So just because you had some time to come together and surface what that common agenda or shared vision might be many years ago, you know, networks are emergent spaces, and what they're trying to do and the context in which they're operating is evolving all the time. And so that common purpose or the specificity of that common purpose is going to shift as well. So making sure that that conversation is an often repeated one. And then around convening people, to build on what Brenda and Vic were saying, for me, this is really about the who. Who is doing the network weaving? Because this requires such care, nurturing care and patience, and people who are happy with uncertainty and with emergence, and people who are able to hold the space without dominating it themselves and amplify the voices of others, and people who find joy, as I do, in connecting people and connecting dots and connecting ideas. And those are the people that you want to have as your network weavers, not the people who necessarily want to be standing at the front, although it's great to have those people as well. And then in terms of convening people, the other piece that we've learnt is that having some infrastructure, some light touch infrastructure helps. So, for example, we've been experimenting over the last couple of years with having sectoral hubs, and these are specific hubs with leads from our network who are in charge of setting the agenda. So, for example, within the NGFP network, we've got a peace and security hub. We've got 3 members from the network who have defined what that purpose is. They've listened to all the members, and they're the ones who are, you know, almost coming to us and saying, you know, these are the people that we want to be connected with. These are the spaces that we want to be in to amplify our voices. And our role at SWAF is not to set that agenda. It's actually to get out of the way and to listen to that hub and to know when we can be useful. So I think we've chatted about network weaving and how to integrate network weaving into futures and foresight. But I'm really curious, in the spirit of thinking about what next and imagining the future, and what do you all think that the future of network weaving looks like?
Well, I'm kind of person who I think everybody says that I look at the glass half empty. I don't think that's true. I think I'm just a realist and a pragmatist. And I think when you hear us talking about networks, you hear a lot about connection, community, listening, and patience. And so we'll talk about network weaving being an art form, and that really requires direct human interaction. But the way our world is changing, a lot of network weaving interaction, as the networks grow big, as Victoria is saying, is taking place through technology. There's a lot of focus on using technology and AI and all these things to try and weave and bring people and communities together. And that's fantastic. It means that we can draw on resources from all over the world, from people with different experiences, but at the same time, it brings in a lot of disconnection. We all know that engaging behind a computer screen or engaging with somebody remotely is not the same as when we engage with them in person. And I think we all saw that during the COVID pandemic. And network weaving really is an art. It's an art about building trust. It's an art about seeing somebody and having them relate with you in a way that they're able to trust you and sometimes cede their power to you to bring them and connect them together. And so I would say for a lot of young people who, I mean, technology is great and they've been able to do great things with it, they still must remember that there is a risk, and they must reflect on that risk of what will happen to the networks that they form when you lose that human connection. It's not a negative thing. I think technology is wonderful, but at the same time, the networks that we begin to weave will change, and the trust and the nature of our relationships will change as we begin to use technology to be the foundational basis of the networks that we weave. But, you know, I think Alice has a more positive, probably helpful perspective on this, and so I'll hand over to her.
I am an optimist usually, but I mean, with everything going on in the world right now, I'm not sure if I can keep that up, but we'll see. I think just before I go into it, what I do want to say about I alluded to earlier, the context of what's happening in New Zealand at the moment, and what I wanted to just reference is the fact that for the last, I'd say 10 years, the language revitalisation movement in New Zealand has been an access point for non-Māori to engage in Māoridom and into how to support some of the causes of Indigenous people, what it means to relate in a way that works for Māori. And what I think is that was a mechanism to mean that all these people now have been interconnected, have been relating in different ways, and now they're ready to go, and they're allies to that network. So I just wanted to say that, and I think just in summary, because I can see that we've got about 5 minutes left, I wanted to say, so if we wanted you to take anything out of today, Networks is about bridging communities, cultures, ideas, knowledge systems. And the reason that that's valuable is because when we go into the complexity of our future, we need more ways to think in different, alternative, radical, broad, holistic, positive ways for the future. And that's so that the future that we navigate towards together are futures that are more collaborative, are more inclusive, and are more abundant. So that's why we think networks are important, and we do have about 5 minutes. So we've got someone who's going to take maybe 1 or 2 questions from the audience. So if you have a question, you can pop up your hand and we'll be able to take a few.
I said this last year as well, so I might just say it again because we're very short on time. Just if you could make sure that your question has a question mark on the end of it, that would be super helpful.
There's a question there. Is there a mic?
I think we have one down at the front.
And
I don't know if there's a mic.
Can they shout?
Okay, I'm not sure if there's a mic coming, but maybe we could take the question from the front here?
Yeah.
If you're happy to
Yell.
Shout.
project your voice and we can answer it. Oh, perfect,
Brill.
thank you.
Thank you. My question is, if you were about to get started in a country where none of this exists, where would you start?
Okay, I'll jump in super quickly just because I think start by understanding current state. So start by doing the minimum viable of this, just mapping who is out there and who is doing what.
Yeah.
And then look at how you can start to build connections between.
And I would add to that, go where the energy is. So identify a few champions to start.
Another question,
Hi.
this lady here. We've lost our runner.
Where's our mic?
The mic?
If you can shout.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was a very interesting session. One question just comes to my mind seeing this networking. What factors contribute to connecting to the same person and have that connection being common across all people who connected with?
Sorry, I didn't get the question. Did you?
Are you, sorry, I'm going to see if I've got the question right. Are you asking what happens if there's a single person that seems to be responsible for the network?
What factors contribute to connecting, let's say there's one person who has a network with other people, what factors are contributing to that specific person for networking? And are there common factors that has been studied that connect those people to the same person?
Did you get it?
I'm not quite there, but I'm going to give it a crack. You'll often find in networks, and jump in guys as well, but you'll often find in networks that there are key people that tend to hold a lot of that connection, and that's not necessarily a bad thing until it's the always thing. So where you can, you should always be trying to identify other people who might not be as large of a node, but ones that you can support to have greater reach, because it is a problem. It's a massive risk if you have one single person that is, I guess, responsible for navigating and connecting the network.
Yeah. We call that sometimes the hub and spoke model, and there's the risk, obviously, if the hub moves on or isn't interested anymore, that it means that the entire network can dissipate. And so the ideal is a sort of a multi-hub model, whereby there is no actual center. There might be some coordinating centrality, but there's not a sort of central holder of relationships.
Okay, I think we're going to close. We said that there's a QR code that maybe we can, hopefully, we'll see last time lucky if we can get the final one, which is a code that you can scan that will take you to a website, a web page that has some of the resources, things that we referenced today, and some of our work. And thank you all so much for being here. We really appreciate it. And look, we've created a new network of people who like networks. So,
Very much so.
kia ora koutou, ngā mihi. Thank you.
Thank you.